Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we will face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we are both sober and happy. In this episode, I want to talk about what to do if you just relapse. Most of the focus around relapse is through relapse prevention methods, and with that focus, we tend to think all is lost if we actually do relapse. I think the biggest thing you could do for relapse prevention if you have already relapsed is to shift the focus off the fact that you relapsed to focusing on what you could learn from this so that you could break the patterns that led you to where you are now. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. If you have recently relapsed or seem to be stuck in the cycle of chronically relapsing, the best way to prevent future relapse is to analyze the pattern that led up to the other ones. I see that people often default to the mindset of 6 months down the drain after a relapse, which sends them to a place of self-pity, which often causes someone to spiral back into the depths of their addiction rather than seeing the relapse as a mistake that should be fixed now. What if instead you looked at that relapse as an experience that could prevent any future relapses? Then those 6 months of recovery and the events that led up to your relapse not only wouldn't be a waste, but instead could be what prevents you from doing it again. To do that, look back on the period that led up to the relapse. What were the thoughts that began creeping into your head that started shifting you off the path of recovery? Things that are common are, it's not even worth it. It's too hard. I wonder if I could control it. Just this once. Or my favorite, this time it's going to be different. What actions changed in you that shifted how you felt in a negative way? Were there other habits that crept back into your life that were making you feel worse about the person you were? Were you starting to do things that you knew were putting you in situations that were dangerous? Were there things that were working well that you stopped doing? Write all of these down and burn them into your brain. These will become the red flags when they creep up in this attempt at your recovery. Plan now what you will do when you recognize them. If we're not aware, then often we have no defense, but becoming aware and having a plan will set up the defenses we need moving forward. When things get tough, was your default reaction just to give up? If so, you may have not been connected to a strong enough why for getting sober. I discussed my method for doing this in episode 2, so if you haven't listened to that one, I suggest going back and doing so. Most of us are great starters and go through a cycle like the following. We experience so much pain that we realize we have to change. We make small changes. We see good enough results and convince ourselves that it is enough. We get to the uncomfortable part of recovering that requires life-altering changes. We tell ourselves it's just too hard. And then we give up. The key to success in relapse prevention is recognizing the patterns like that. Not just the patterns that lead to failure, but also the patterns that breed success and happiness. Once we recognize those patterns, we could lean away from the negative pattern and towards the positive ones that serve us best. The best tool for me to recognize patterns has been keeping a consistent journal. I keep mine simple. I have daily items that I know that if I do them, I usually feel better at the end of the day. That includes things like meditation, getting exercise, writing, and connecting with friends. So I have those listed and will check off whether I did them for the day. I also have habits that I know usually affect me negatively. These are typically the things I reach for when I want to avoid feeling things. The biggest one for me is eating unhealthy. So if I had a stressful day at work and instead of doing some healthier methods of coping, I hit the drive-thru and get a supersized combo meal and a giant milkshake, I list that too. Then I write down any other details of the day. Did I spend more time than usual on social media? Did I beat my personal best for numbers of days consistently getting exercise? Did I face a huge fear and push through it? Anything good or bad, I list. And then at the top of the page, I rank from 1 to 10 how I feel at the end of the day. The benefit of doing this is you can quickly identify patterns of what works and doesn't work for you and adjust as you go along. If you're currently battling cravings to drink or use, you could also create a cravings log to better understand yourself and what type of things and situations challenge you. Ask yourself questions like, can this situation be avoided? And if not, how can I change my story so that the situation does not have as much power over me? Look at the moment of craving and see the behaviors or ideas that came before it. For example, when I was first sober, most of my Facebook friends were people that I drank with for many years. I spent way too much time in early sobriety browsing Facebook and seeing pictures of my old friends having parties. This put me in a constant state of feeling like I was missing out on life and that my new sober life was boring. In this case, I had an opportunity to both take steps to avoid the event that was triggering me and also start changing my story, so it did not have as much power over me. It took several steps to dial this in, but here are the steps that I took. I tried to get on Facebook less. Sometimes this worked, sometimes it didn't. What I found was the periods when I was on Facebook more was when I was feeling down and very vulnerable. So although overall I spent less time on Facebook, I was on there the most when seeing those posts would have the most negative effect on me. Avoiding Facebook was not working at the moment. I went through a stage of self-pity about how life was not fair, how social media was evil, condemning a society that glorifies drinking, and every other thing in life that was out of my control. Then I decided to get back to trying to work on what I had power over. At that moment, I realized that complete avoidance of Facebook was not working, so what can I do to eliminate seeing these posts that negatively affected me? I didn't like the idea of unfriending all the people in my old life. I was worried about them thinking I was the guy that just got too good for them now that I quit drinking, and I still wanted to be available if any of them reached out down the road knowing that I quit drinking. I found the elimination technique that I was willing and able to do was unfollow them so that my Facebook was not flooded with partying posts. The second step of that process was committing to working on changing my story. The story I was telling myself at the time was that I was missing out on life after I quit drinking, and I was doomed to a life of boredom. I started friending more people I met in recovery and started following people that inspired me. I made a list of all the things that I like to do and the things in life that I always wanted to pursue but never did because I was so busy drinking. I joined Facebook groups around those activities so I would see posts about people having fun doing those activities instead. So now when I was feeling down and still reached for the Facebook crutch, although it was still not a healthy alternative, what I ended up getting was a feed full of more positive, uplifting things rather than the pictures of my old friends partying. Before I knew it, I stopped just observing and started participating in those activities and soon started building my new life. Before I knew it, I was enjoying the new activities more and missing the old life less. And then one day, I realized I had changed my story. The decision to make one small shift on something was a critical moment for me. I tend to gravitate towards the extreme of all or nothing, but most of the time it is the small shifts we make in our behaviors that end up making the most difference. I only recognize the problem, the opportunity to make a change, and the results of that change by journaling my day. So if you're not doing some form of journaling now, I would suggest starting. No need to make it perfect or complicated, just start doing it. Do whatever method works for you and is easy to do. So many people relapse because they start dipping their toes in the old world. Maybe they start talking with old friends, start entertaining the idea of whether they could drink socially, they go back into a toxic relationship with an ex, or start engaging in other activities that they know is bad for them. Most of the time, we already have all the evidence we need to know whether we should do this. For example, I don't know anyone that hadn't tried multiple times to control their drinking before finally having to start. However, once we get sober, all is said in the thought that maybe I could really just have a few and not let it get out of control tends to creep into our head again. This is because we keep everything in our head, which is also where rationalization and justification live, so thoughts could get a little warped in that space. However, once we write things down, I find it harder to justify the same behaviors. But what if you relapse and don't have a journal to look back on? Try to look back on the things that you stopped doing or started doing in the days or months leading up to the relapse. Relapse is rarely caused by a moment of weakness. It usually is accumulation of things that started putting us in a vulnerable state of mind, and then we eventually reach what I call the F-it point, and then we finally give in. The key is recognizing how we got to the F-it point and break the pattern way before we reach it the next time. If you're having trouble finding points where you started wandering off the path, I will share some of the most common traits I see in people that have relapsed. We give ourselves permission to relapse and create a predetermined outcome that it is going to happen. How many times do you hear the phrase repeated that relapse is a part of recovery? When we introduce that concept into our minds, we are already including relapse in our recovery journeys when we should be doing the exact opposite. I personally experienced something very similar. The rehab center I went to advertises that if you relapsed, you could come back and go through the program for free. I remember a couple of weeks into being in the program, I was having a conversation with my mom, who was the one who paid for me to go to rehab, and I told her that I was glad that if I relapsed, I had a place to come back to. She told me, "I can't afford to send you to rehab again, so going back if you relapse isn't an option." What the rehab didn't mention until you were there is that you would still have to go through the detox program again at a high cost, so it really wasn't free. Plus, since this rehab was on the other side of the country, there was also travel costs, not to mention other random costs of supporting a son in rehab. When she told me that coming back was not an option, something in my brain switched and I realized I had to stay sober. Them telling me I could come back subconsciously made it okay to relapse, and I was already creating a scenario in my mind where I was going to relapse and come back to the rehab. I wasn't planning on it, but I kept it in my mind that it was a real possibility and it was okay if it happened. I can imagine if I didn't have that conversation with my mom and down the road I hit a tough patch in life or the temptation was strong, the thought of, well, I could drink tonight and if it gets too bad, I could just go back to rehab would have crept into my mind. And once we give ourselves permission, we are so far down the road towards relapse that it's often hard to turn around. When we tell ourselves that relapse is a part of recovery, we are doing the same thing. I'm not criticizing you if you have relapsed, but just want you to realize the dangers of repeating that phrase. It might be a part of your journey or your story up to this point, but relapse is the opposite of recovery. And changing your mindset to recognize this will increase your odds of not relapsing again in the future. What we say matters, so we should stop including a relapse in our recovery. I think the most common trait I see for relapse is the avoidance of dealing with difficult emotions and feelings. Many people who get drawn into the world of addiction are doing so because the substance is working to deal with emotions or situations we don't know how to deal with. Then through our addictions, we do even more things that we struggle to even think about. We hope that simply eliminating the substance will change those things, but it doesn't. I think that is why it is so common that people seek out other things to mask the feelings after they get sober. I don't think it is an issue of cross-addiction or having an addictive personality. It simply is a problem of not being healed from our past. If you haven't realized yet on my podcast, most of my episodes focus on the core issues of addiction and not the substance, so I think any of the episodes can help you to begin this process, but I'd really focus on episodes 3 and 4, which discuss in detail forgiveness and healing our past. Another common trait is that we give up because we aren't seeing the results we want. Maybe it has taken longer to gain back the trust of the people in our lives. Maybe we are still struggling financially. Maybe you've not yet learned how to enjoy life sober and it seems boring. I see a lot of people get stuck in the lull between the spot of the initial feeling of getting sober, also known as the pink cloud, and the point where we start finding true joy in our lives. We start questioning whether it is worth it, whether life is always going to be this difficult or unfulfilling. In recovery, we often don't see the results of all the hard work until the moment that we see it. And you don't know when that moment will arrive until you're in that moment. One of my favorite podcasts is the Ed Milet Show. He talks on there often about how the lasting rewards in life are not instant and come from compounding effort. He tells a great story about watching kids at a birthday party smack a piñata. Kid after kid goes up and takes a couple of swings and not one piece of candy comes out. The biggest and strongest kids have taken huge swings, yet the piñata sits there seemingly undamaged. Then finally, the smallest kid at the party steps up. No one is expecting this kid to bust open the piñata, but on the first swing he takes, he busts it open and all the candy comes flowing out. There was nothing special about this kid who busted open the piñata with one swing. He was benefiting from the accumulated effort of every swing that came before him. Each whack every kid took got everyone closer to the treasure inside, but you could not see it. No one knows which swing is finally going to bust it open. That is the fun part. Everyone is on the edge of their seat with every swing, ready to pounce on the treasure of candy that flows to the ground when that one magical swing finally busts it open. Recovery is like that. We often don't see the results of our efforts until down the road, but when we finally get to that point, all the accumulated effort from all the work we have done will result in a huge bounty of rewards. Most of us with addiction issues chase instant gratification, so this could be challenging to wait for happiness, relief, and results. We have to change that mindset. I remember my friend Jack was so used to me flaking on him over the years when I was drinking, so much so that if we had plans, he would remind me multiple times. This was often necessary when I was drinking, but after I got sober, I became very reliable. Yet for a long time, he still insisted on sending me reminder texts. This drove me nuts. I knew I was reliable. I've shown him for months I can be reliable, yet he still kept insisting on reminding me. Until one day, the reminder text stopped, and I haven't gotten one since. It wasn't because the last time I showed up when I said I would, I did something different. It was a cumulative effort of me showing up time after time until one day the piñata finally opened up and trust was developed. What do you think would have happened if instead of showing up again that last time, I would have said, you know what? He is never ever going to think I'm going to be reliable. What's the point of even showing up? All of that cumulative effort would have been lost, and I would have walked away right before the piñata busted open. I see this with people who give up after they have put so much effort into their recovery. They relapse before they see results, and so much of the cumulative effort they have put in gets lost. This is just one example, but that theme is throughout my recovery. My mom didn't stop worrying about me relapsing until the moment she did. I didn't stop obsessing about alcohol until the moment I did. I didn't find true joy and happiness in my sober life until the moment I did. Here's the flip side of that. There's also cumulative damage. Every time we cause damage when we're drinking or using, we take a whack at different piñatas representing parts of our life. And although it may seem the damage isn't permanent with each hit, we never know what hit is going to bust it open. What if this really is your last chance with your family and the next relapse is when they finally say that is enough? You never know when your last chance is really your last chance until it's too late. It is important to keep that in mind when you flirt with the idea of just one more. Don't give up one swing too early. Don't leave before you get the candy. You may not see the effects of the hard work you're doing now, but your moment will come. I want you to take advantage of this opportunity for another chance you have in life. I want you to walk through your challenges instead of trying to avoid or go around them so that you can walk out stronger on the other side. I want you to live an amazing, fulfilled, happy life, and I know that is possible for you, and I hope this episode has helped you move towards that. If you know someone who has relapsed recently or who struggles with chronic relapsing that you think this episode might help, please send this to them so hopefully it can help them too. I'm doing this because I know a lot of people are struggling in their recovery, and I want to help as many people as I can, and that is only possible with your help. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and keep living sober and happy.